Good afternoon. I'm George Latimer, Westchester County Executive. We're here to talk about a perfect example of intergovernmental cooperation that involves our state government and our county government working toward a positive end. For that conversation, I'm joined by State Assemblywoman Amy Paulin, Director of our Office of Consumer Protection, Jim Maisano, and of course our Deputy County Executive, Ken Jenkins. There's an opportunity to make changes within county government when we see things that we'd like to see done differently, but we don't always have the power in the county government to make some of those changes. The power and the authority falls beyond our area. This is when we work cooperatively with the state government and in those circumstances the federal government, but many times these ideas come from the people that are on the firing lines every day of doing some type of program, implementing some kind of effort within the county government. Jim Maisano, who's our Director of Consumer Protection, is a colleague of mine. We served together in the Westchester County Board of Legislators, and he agreed to come on board as head of this department when we began our administration. He's done a terrific job, and in doing that terrific job, it's not just administering the responsibilities as they exist, but to think creatively and thoughtfully about things that we could do for the future. Jim was able to identify something that made a lot of sense to us, and I'd like him to talk about it, and then we'll talk about what we did with that good idea. Mr. Maisano.
Thank you, George. Thanks so much. So a couple of years ago, about 2 years ago, maybe into 3 years ago, we started getting a bunch of phone calls in consumer protection from both consumers and merchants asking us about the credit card surcharge law. Now, that's not something we got many calls about ever. All of a sudden, it became like a lot of calls, and then our guys in the field who were doing inspections were also getting questions about it. And why did all this happen? The New York State Court of Appeals did a legal opinion overturning the law in the general business law that banned credit card surcharges. Problem was, nobody really explained that to the state of New York, that the court had made this monumental decision. It was a lawsuit between merchants against the state over the law, and the merchants won, at least a partial victory. So what the court did, though, what was interesting, because they didn't just say the law was unconstitutional. They said, we can have credit card we can have credit card surcharge in New York State, but only under these grounds. And they listed like 3 or 4 grounds you're allowed to have credit card surcharges. So we got in the middle of this. We called the New York State AG's office. We called around the state to other consumer protection offices. And we were kind of blown away that the calls that were coming in were accurate. People were saying, we don't know what the law is. And like nobody knows what the law is because you have this court opinion nobody knows about. So after we made all our calls and didn't get the help we asked for from around the state, I'll leave it at that, after a lot of phone calls, we made a phone call to our trusty superstar state assemblywoman, Amy Paulin, told her the story. She came up, she met with myself and Ethan Bogan, who's here, and John Gassione at the start, and we told her all about the problem, and she said, I'm happy to help, which was awesome. So we showed her exactly what the court said. And Ethan and I actually drafted legislation that she could pass as a first draft to run with based on what the court said. Because at the end of the day, the court said, you can have credit card surcharge, the general business law is overturned, but only under these grounds. So we wrote that out. Amy then took the legislation and she brought it to the assembly staff, and she talked to the state AG's office. She talked to everyone, as she does, and got into a final form to pass, and we continued to stay in the process, working with her the entire time until it got into final form. It took 2 full legislative sessions to get it done, and Amy passed the law. And then the governor signed the law, and now it is the law of New York State. What they did was they amended the general business law section that banned it. They turned it into the law based on what the court said. If you ask me what the court said, basically the court said, you can't do a credit card surcharge unless the consumer is fully noticed. The consumer's got to know when they walk into the store that this restaurant has a credit card surcharge. All right, you can't just hit a consumer with it at the end of the transaction on the bill. That wouldn't comply with what the court said. So that's now what this new law says in New York State, thanks to Amy and the governor signing the law as well. And we appreciate our county executive as well, who gives our office full support throughout this. And I did brief George along the way, our county executive, about this law, and he said run with it. So we ran with it, and I'm happy to tell you today that the New York State Consumer Protection Office was the driving force to change this law. And we're very proud of that because we take great pride in the fact that we are the best consumer protection office in New York State, and this is good evidence that. We found the problem in the field, doing our job, and it ended up with changing state law, and we're proud of that, and we appreciate all the help we got. Thank you.
Amy?
Jim really said it all. But I will just say that no bill is an easy one, and it took convincing even to the parties that were involved in the lawsuit to be able to convince them that this was the right way to go. What the law essentially does is it means when you go into a restaurant where this was typically happening, or you go in as the example that the department had given me, which is really what drove me, which is going into a car dealer. And then on top of the bill, imagine for a car, right? $30,000, $50,000 car. And then there's a surcharge of whatever it is. And there was nothing in the court decision that really constrained what the surcharge should be. It said it needed to be transparent, which means that if you go into a restaurant, you have to see the price that the credit card charge would be. So if it was a $20 eggplant parm, right, it couldn't be $20 and then a 3%, 4% surcharge on top. It needed to reflect the actual cost. So what the bill does is it essentially says two things. One, that the surcharge has to be transparent, just like the court case. But in addition, the surcharge can't be more than what is being charged to the business itself. Mm-hmm. So that if the business is getting charged 3%, that's all the consumer can pay on top. If the business is getting charged 2%, that's all the consumer can be expected to pay on top. So what you're going to see now when you go into restaurants, because I've already seen it, it's very prevalent in Albany for some reason, that added surcharge, which just gave me more fuel to the fire to get this done. You'll see cash discounts. And so you'll see that, it'll be the $20 eggplant parm, and then if you give them cash, it's off the bill. But we haven't addressed that yet. I don't know if that's bad or good. I'm waiting for the department to tell me. But that's the new way that they're, I wouldn't say getting around it, because you're paying less money, not more. So it's really, it's a win-win. And at the end of the day, we had support memos across the board from the business community because, first and foremost, it was confusing. And so many of the businesses were actually confused themselves. So they were confused about what the right thing to do was. It's not that they intended to violate the law. They were unsure what it was. You don't have a car dealership reading a Court of Appeals decision. You don't have an Italian restaurant reading Court of Appeals decision. So because of that, they get advice from various sources, and the advice was scattered, different, and unclear. So this made it very clear, and at the end of the day, I think everybody was very pleased. So I want to thank the county for bringing it to my attention. I get a lot of good laws. This we nicknamed Jim's surcharge bill. We nickname all our bills to remember what they are. So thanks. This has been a really great experience working with the department and working with the county on this job, in this bill.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Amy. I'm going to ask Ken Jenkins to comment for a second. We go through a process in the county government, and Jim, as a former legislator, both Ken and I are former county legislators, in which we try to identify legislation that we support that may be coming before the state legislature. Having also served in the state legislature with Amy in the Assembly and in the Senate, that dialogue becomes very important, because when you look at some issues from a local standpoint, you don't necessarily know how it plays out all across the state. But by the same token, when you look at it from a state perspective, you don't know what the impacts are back on the local level. Ken has had to deal with this as a former chairman of the Board of Legislators. So in terms of that state-county relationship, Ken, perhaps you want to share a few of your thoughts, and then I'll close out.
All right, and thank you, George. And first, thank you, Amy, Assemblymember Amy Paulin, the #1 legislator as far as passing bills, and I forget how many years in a row it is, but probably 4 or 5, maybe longer.
At least 3.
At least 3. So at least the last 3 years, we know that Assemblymember Amy Paulin has been the leader in getting legislative, not just introduced, but getting adopted and signed into law. So again, that is a tremendous accomplishment, and it's tremendous for us to have Assemblymember Amy Paulin here in Westchester County, where we're able to use that. And because of Jim Maisano and the great relationships that have happened over the years, and how we worked here in county government, working with all of our partners at each and every level to make sure that the consumers and Westchester County residents needs get addressed. This is another great example of that. When Jim and I were on the County Board of Legislators, it's the example most people see right now. When you go into the gas station and you see the price for credit or for cash, it's a similar process. And it took the great work of Jim and John Gassion and Ethan here in the room with us, and Lala Curtin with the Consumer Protection team, to make sure now that information gets out. And it just started this week. So the law got implemented whenever the governor signed it, but it started just this week. And it's something that's very important for every Westchester County and New York State resident to understand, because again, we have to make sure that the prices are really disclosed, and however they're doing it with cash discounts, et cetera, that people cannot pay more than what the businesses is getting charged. So it's just really now a pass across charge, not another source of revenue. And again, want to congratulate Jim Maisano, his entire team, for bringing that to the attention of Assemblymember Paulin, and then Assemblymember Paulin in her traditional dogmatic fashion in ensuring that not only the needs were addressed, getting partners on the Senate side to get that bill across the line, and then the Governor Hochul signing it. So congratulations, Amy, again, for the hard work, Jim and the entire Consumer Protection team for the work on behalf of Westchester County consumers. And Jim has been in that job since the day one, taking the Consumer Protection Department to another level. So congratulations again, Jim. And back to you, George.
Thank you, Ken. So this story is just one of many stories that represent seeing a problem as it exists, and a problem that you might experience when you go to purchase a product or a service and seeing a charge on it. You don't know what it is, and you don't know whether it's legally levied or not. And this becomes what this all means to you, the individual. Are you going to be charged for something that you should not be charged for, and that for which you have no explanation? You don't know how the value is added with this additional money on it. It's a story about what government ought to be doing every single time out of the box. And I recognize sometimes these stories are very small, and they don't necessarily affect every single person. Just yesterday, as a side point, I had the opportunity to stand with some officials from Pelham, the village and the town of Pelham. There were some elected officials, there were some people from within the government, and some folks from the local school, PTA, and so forth. And we were standing at the exit on Stanford Boulevard of the southbound Hutchinson River Parkway, where there is a traffic flow problem. There's a pedestrian crosswalk, and there's lights and things that aren't working the way it was. Amy joined us. She had a staff present. She joined us remotely because she was in Albany, and she was on the phone and interacting with us. And we talked through, how do we solve this problem? There is a problem at that intersection. We perhaps have a game plan. There's certain things the county can do. There's certain things that we can do in concert with the city of Mount Vernon and the town of Pelham, which are right adjacent there. And there's some things that are within the authority of the state of New York and the Department of Transportation that have to be dealt with. And so we met to talk about, how do we solve the problem? That problem is not yet solved, but we're in the process of working on it. But this is the message of this discussion, that if you want government to work, then you have to focus on results, not just process, not just the things that we all say, and we all give our speeches and we all make our points very generically about what we think government ought to be. All 4 of us have run for office and made our points in that kind of a context. But at the end of the day, it's about what we accomplish. This story is about accomplishing an end that is beneficial to the consumer. And the fact that it was identified at one level of government, it had to be addressed at another level of government, means that it's not just important enough for you to have a grasp of the problem and see how it affects the individual, but you've got to work cooperatively. You've got to figure out how to work across the aisle, and how you have to work across different levels of government, where one government has an authority that the other government doesn't have. When we do it right, we solve a problem. You may not see the problem if we solve it, because you don't have an issue come up that you need to have clarification on. And if we solve the one in Pelham that we're working on, or all the other ones that we have, then we're doing our job. But it's important that we take a story like this and tell you, and to tell you in everyday terms, so that you understand through all the cacophony of the noise, all of the things that are asserted and said in the body politic, all of the culture war things that divide us, that underneath all of that has to be government that understands what a problem is and how do we solve it. In this particular case, this problem would not have been solved if it wasn't for the diligence of Jim Maisano and his team. It would not have been solved if a state legislator like Amy Paulin did not jump in and take the responsibility to get an idea into a law to passage. It's not easy to do that. When I served in that legislature, infinitely harder to pass something at the state level of government than it would be at a local level of government. You have 2 houses of the legislature and all of that. But at the end of the day, the system worked. I'm George Latimer, Westchester County Executive. Thank you for watching. Have a good weekend, and we'll talk to you next week.